guys, Marian here. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to film a parenting reflection about what has been the hardest transition. 0 to 1 kids, 1 to 2, or 2 to 3. So I hope this video helps you if you are in the midst of one of these parenting transitions, and to just give you some reflections and thoughts as you go into it, some advice that I have learned along the way, and just what my experience has been like. So I hope you guys like this video. If you do, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up to let me know, and hit the red subscribe button down below if you want to see more of parenting life with 3 little boys. Okay, so I think my opinions on this are actually slightly controversial, and I'm gonna start out with one that is probably going to be like, what? And that is, I think the actual biggest transition, hear me out, was going from 0 to 1 dogs. Yes, before we became parents to humans, me and my husband became parents to a little puppy named Rocky, who you've seen in all my videos because he's literally attached to me and is next to me at all times. He's actually right on the bed over there. Getting a dog, we got the dog when my husband graduated from law school and I was working full-time. It really changed what we were doing day to day because we couldn't just go from work to going out at night, you know, and having fun because we had to come home and walk the dog. And it changed a lot of our weekends too. We couldn't like be out all day, all night. We had to be home walking the dog. So I feel like that was actually the first real shift to us in terms of priorities. We were always thinking about the dogs. We were always like counting the hours, like making sure he wasn't home by himself too long. And it of course changed our budget. We had to hire a dog walker because we were both working full time. And it just was a huge shift. I'm not saying it was terribly hard, like we both loved having a dog. We were so excited for that transition, but I would say that was the first big shift. And I remember it was at a time when none of our friends, like maybe were even engaged, like nobody had dogs, nobody had homes or kids or anything like that. So we were kind of the first ones to have that big transition in our life, and I really remember noticing it and feeling it at the time. We also brought Rocky out with us everywhere. Like he was such a part of our life as like a young couple back then. And I don't know, I think that when you do get a dog, especially if you get a puppy and you have to potty train them or house train them, it's a big change. Okay, moving on to children, what you're actually here for. I would say overall, if I had to pick one, the most difficult, if we're going to use that term, the most difficult transition was, I would say, going 0 to 1. And the reason for that primarily was that I had a really, really rough birth experience with my first son, and there was so much healing that had to be done physically, emotionally, mentally, and I would say it took a good 6 months, if not a year, to really get through that. I absolutely loved being a mom from day one, and I never found that, like, you know, so many women experience those kind of postpartum anxieties and depressions and identity shifts. I never thankfully had any of that. I was just like, I was so thankful and desperate to be a mom. Like that was just, I felt like my calling for so long. So I never experienced any of that, but just the physical change that your body goes through after giving birth, especially if you have a traumatic birth, that was a huge adjustment. And I've mentioned this before on my channel, but I share this story often of, so our dogs, speaking of our dogs, we had 2 at the time, still do. They went to like, I don't remember where they went, like a puppy daycare. They went somewhere, you know, right when we gave birth, thankfully, because we were going to be, you know, away from the home a few days and then coming home with a newborn. And they're like big dogs. So anyways, we were finally at the point where I could make it down the stairs to sit at the dinner table. It was probably like day 4 maybe of giving birth, and I just remember sobbing and thinking how much I missed our dogs. But it wasn't really that I missed our dogs, it was that I missed like my body, you know, my ability to be a dog mom, to take my dogs on a walk, to do all these things. Suddenly I was in this like major recovery mode, and could hardly, you know, lift my baby, let alone take a dog on a walk. So that was a huge shift. And there was also such a big learning curve. My memory of the postpartum time with my oldest son Max was just Googling all the time, every little thing. There was just so much to learn, and I really wanted to become an expert. You know, like that's my personality, right? I rarely take advice from anybody. I do my own research and learned so much about it. So I really was getting like a PhD in motherhood that year. I researched every single little possible thing. If you look back on my channel from that time, actually, you'll see it in the videos I made. I made videos about being a Montessori mom, about what toys to buy, what food, how to do baby-led weaning. Like every little thing I learned about, I would make a video about to teach others. And I felt very confident making those videos because I had done such enormous amount of research on it. So that was a huge time consumption and just life altering time in my life. And I don't know if difficult is the right word to use to describe it. I mean, postpartum was difficult, but in terms of like our family dynamic changing from 0 to 1, that wasn't difficult. Like that was wonderful. But just learning to be a mom, not in the sense of how to care and love for a child, but like how often to feed the baby and what does this rash mean and what fever mean and how to take the temperature and all that. There was a learning curve. Then going from 1 to 2 was a wonderful transition. I talk about this a lot. I always felt like when we just had our oldest son, Max, that like the house was quiet. Our family, if you didn't know by watching my vlogs, we love chaos. We love noise. We love chaos. I just love my home feeling very full and lively. And yes, it gets a little much. And yes, sometimes I'm like, couldn't I just have a clean kitchen for a few hours? I definitely get, I have those moments. I feel that 100%. But just in general, like I love the chaos of a busy, full home. When it was just me and Max home during the day, which happened a lot because I stayed home with him, and there was a time I went to work, but then I came. Long story, but there's a lot of time where it was just me and him at home, and I just couldn't wait for another sibling. I really felt like it would just enhance the whole experience of life, like that we were missing this like other sibling being there. And in many, many ways, when Corey was born, I felt so happy and like so much more complete about our family, and that I had given Max a brother, and it was just wonderful. I always talk about how instead of postpartum depression, I have postpartum elation, and I really think it's like hormonal more than anything, but I just am so thrilled to be done with difficult pregnancies and for the baby to be here. So going from 1 to 2 was not difficult. I'm trying to think. I know there were aspects that were harder. Like I remember taking both boys to Target, and Max was then at the time, like 2.5, and we were trying to potty train, and I'm like rushing to the bathroom and then like changing a diaper in Target, and while Max was like running around the bathroom. So that part was also, again, a learning curve, like going out in public with a newborn and a toddler. I remember thinking like, oh, that's a lot. Like I had to rest after that, which is understandable. So that was difficult. And then, it's so crazy because when Corey turned 1, that's when the pandemic hit. And again, I was just so thankful that the two of them had each other, but it was a lot. It was a lot to be home all day, every day, with nothing to do with a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old or 3.5-year-old. So that was a challenge. But overall, the transition from 1 to 2, I would not describe as difficult at all for our family. I absolutely loved it, and I felt like I had just mastered all these like diapering, feeding, like all that newborn stuff. I had just become an expert on, so it was fresh in my mind, and I like snapped right back into it when Corey was born. Okay, then 2 to 3, I would say was slightly harder than 1 to 2, but overall, again, just kind of another like progression. So bringing home Zachary, again, the only difficult part for me that I always find is that my postpartum body is like weak. Like you just got home from the hospital. Like thankfully his birth was really easy, but still I wasn't able to like run around with my kids. And being pregnant is also really hard for me. I spend a lot of the time asleep or just, in my bed and miserable. So my husband has to take up a lot of the parenting duties. So there's a lot of guilt in that for me, and felt like I was like missing out on things. So when the baby actually comes, when the big transition comes, that to me is like the best part. So I think I have found that going from 2 to 3 and 1 to 2 has been easy compared to being pregnant and having other kids around. But other things that happened were, I would say, going from 2 to 3 was a little harder of a transition for my middle son Corey than it was for Max when Corey was born, if that makes sense. So Corey was also 2.5 when he got a little brother, but at the same time he was also a little brother. Like, he became a middle child, and I think that's a lot harder of a transition than just becoming a big brother, because he has like double dynamics to work through. And again, it's always like, you know, because of the age gap of our kids, there's potty training and changing from a crib to a bed and like all these things going on, going to school, the pandemic sort of ending. So there was so much change going on for Corey. And I think one of the other things that was interesting is Max, my oldest, just absolutely fell in love with Zachary on day one. It was like this amazing big brother. And I think Corey was kind of, you know, struggling where his place was. Like, was he's not a baby, so he has to like do what Max is doing in terms of like being this older big brother to the baby. You know, he wants to emulate his big brother, but also like I don't think was ready for that kind of role as a like 2.5-year-old, in the same way that Max, when he was 2.5 and Corey came along, you know, wasn't like that. He was still a little kid himself. So I just think being a middle kid is really tough. So I was very focused on that, and I still am. I pay a lot of attention to Corey and how he's feeling, and making sure he doesn't feel like he can't be the baby anymore, because that's a tendency that I had, is like grouping Max and Corey together as the older kids. And I have like a baby, and then I have 2 older kids, but actually I have a, you know, almost kindergartner, a toddler / preschooler, and a baby, like 3 really different roles. So I tried to kind of separate them, give them each their individuality. But back to what's difficult. So speaking of going out in public, you know, all the newborn stuff that was hard the first and even the second time around, like, oh my goodness, am I gonna need to change their diaper? Are they gonna cry? Are they gonna be hungry? All of that is like easy peasy. I love having a newborn baby. Like, to me, there's nothing easier than a newborn. That's just how I feel. Even though, like, yes, I was kept up at night many times and all of that, but I just love everything newborn. I have like no anxiety about the newborn days. But taking 2 little boys out in public, whether or not I have a baby with me or not, that can be hard if they decide to run around or whatnot. So I think what was hard is having a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and like the things that they'll get up to around the house. And having the baby is just an extra element, you know, like an extra thing on my mind that I'm trying to, you know, somebody else's schedule I'm trying to fix, right? Like trying to get the baby down for a nap, or making sure that he gets fed and all those things, while at the same time managing all the chaos of the older kids. So that's the best way I can describe the different family dynamics and how things have changed going 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to 3. Of course, ultimately, I just am so like overcome with gratitude of the blessing of having these boys that it's all the challenges fade to the background. And I know that sounds trivial and that I'm maybe minimizing some of the challenges, and I am, but that is ultimately like how I feel about it. But I will say overall, I think it gets easier and easier in terms of the baby, unless like they have their own special needs. But in general, like, you know, once you've done it once before, it becomes easier. And I felt the same, and I feel like I'm learning the same thing, like, you know, from potty training. Once you've done it the second time, you're like, okay, it's no problem, you know, all those things. And you just have so much less anxiety. And we always talk about this in my mom friend groups, like anytime it's the oldest kid and it's something that's happening for the first time, you gotta do all the research, you gotta figure it out, you gotta, you know, do all this stuff, all this making sure of getting it right. And the second kid, you're like, oh, everything's fine. And by the third kid, it's like, you know, but doesn't mean, you know, that anything's different in terms of like your love and attention for them. It's more just that you're calmer, that you know it'll all be fine in the end. So that's my perspective. I hope that has helped some of you. And again, I know I paint everything with a rosy picture, but that is genuinely just how I see the world and how I see my family. So I hope this video has helped you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.